Hey guys, I'm Heidi Prieb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. This month, we are talking about resilience. And today, in particular, I want to talk about what makes a relationship resilient, even if both people inside of the relationship are not securely attached. So, it's commonly known in the attachment world that very often a pairing that gets together is one person being more anxious leaning and the other more avoidant leaning, including partnerships where one of the people might have some disorganized or fearful avoidant patterning. Generally, for those who err insecurely attached, one person will end up inhabiting each of these poles in the relationship because it is what each one is familiar with. Now, what I want to get clear from the get-go here is that anxious avoidant relationships or insecurely attached relationships of any form are absolutely not inherently doomed. In fact, they can be vehicles for tremendous transformation on behalf of both people if both parties are willing and interested in engaging with the relationship in a new way, which means abandoning some of the behaviors that might feel really safe and comfortable for us. So, what we're going to be looking at today is some of the unconscious mistakes that anxious avoidant couples tend to make, either before they become attachment literate and even in a lot of cases afterwards. And then we're going to look at how couples can address those directly and start choosing strategies for navigating the relationship that actually allow each of them to see one another more clearly. So, without further ado, we will get into 10 mistakes that anxious avoidant couples very often make and what they can do to rectify them. Mistake number 1: fixating on each other's bad behavior in the relationship instead of looking at how the relationship dynamic itself is creating a space where those behaviors keep happening. So, it is generally very easy to point fingers at our partners and see everything that they are, in reality, actually doing wrong. Right? So, what I'm not saying here is that you should gaslight yourself and pretend that your partner is always behaving kindly or respectfully towards you if that's not true. But what secure dynamics naturally have and insecure dynamics tend to lack is a strong awareness of context. With anxious avoidant couples, what very often happens is because both of them are naturally a little bit tuned out from context as well as from their own blind spots, they can't always see clearly the ways in which they are impacting and dysregulating one another. Insecure couples tend to think about things in terms of right or wrong. And each party generally has the internalized belief on some level that their way of relating is right and the other person's is wrong. When once again, what we want to be looking at is how do those conflicting worldviews of what is right and wrong in the relationship cause conflict? And how can we address the entire situation at hand instead of just pointing fingers at one another? So, for example, if the anxious person is always exploding and getting angry, is it possible that even though they are being hurtful and not particularly productive in the way that they're getting their emotions across, there's actually some aspect of the relationship that is causing them to reach that boiling point? Maybe when they express their emotions at a lower level, they don't get heard and integrated. And maybe if those things were getting heard and integrated at a lower level, the explosions would not happen as frequently. Or on the flip side, if the avoidant is chronically pulling away and needing more and more space, is it possible that the dynamic is actually not giving them the natural space they need to have regular points of connection to themselves? Are there parts of themselves that get very subtly rejected when they try to bring them into the relationship dynamic? And if so, is it possible that their pulling away is a natural response to not being able to bring their full selves into the relationship because their full selves might actually dysregulate the other person? So there are a million different examples of this. But essentially, if we want to start working against this phenomenon, what we want to start doing is anytime there is a recurring problem in the relationship that feels like it is all your partner's fault, regardless of what each of your attachment orientations are, if you can sit down and be with the question as a couple, how is it possible that this behavior is in fact adaptive within the context of our relationship? You're going to start surfacing some answers that are going to get you closer to what the actual solution is. Because very often, both people tend to think if my partner would just stop X, Y, or Z, then everything would be great in the relationship. where in reality, a lot of the time, the change that is being asked for is something that would upset the power dynamic in a significant way that might make both people really uncomfortable on a subconscious level. And we're going to get to that later on in the video, but essentially what we want to focus on here is instead of simply pointing at your partner's flaws and deciding that they are wrong and you are right, even if that's true, even if they are overtly just acting like an asshole, can you ask yourself the question, what might be going on in the dynamic that is causing each of us to react the way that we are reacting? And can we fix something at the core of this dynamic that is actually going to lessen the frequency of whatever behavior it is that's so frustrating for one or both people? So this already gets us moving in the direction of, instead of looking at problems as you against me, it's you and me against the problem. Mistake number 2 that trips up so many anxious avoidant couples is failing to make explicit agreements about what they want and expect inside of the relationship, and instead holding on to these silent contracts or silent expectations that they have for each other, and then becoming really resentful when the other person is not reading their minds and giving them what they have never explicitly said they wanted. And so to fix this, there's kind of 2 different levels that we can address it on. One is at the beginning of a relationship or at any point in the relationship where it starts becoming apparent that you're not necessarily on the same page, you want to start asking each other and yourselves, do we have a shared vision for this relationship? So is there a direction that we both are sure we want to move in together? And how can we work as a team to start getting there? And if so, or once we get that in place, can we make explicit a lot of things around how we would need to relate to each other, to our environments, and to the relationship in order to make sure that we are moving towards that vision? And again, this might seem really basic to those of you who are more secure, but I remember one particular relationship I had in my 20s where I was with someone for 4 years. We did a ton of attachment healing work within our relationship, only to get to the point where we were finally ready to talk about what we wanted out of our long-term relationship and realized we are aligned on almost nothing. But we had spent so long fighting with each other that we never even got to the starting line where we were able to really sit down and make clear what our wants and needs were long-term. And so that's the first level we want to make sure we're addressing this on, checking in right at the beginning if we can, to see what both people actually want to get out of the relationship. And then the second level we want to address this on is anytime we notice ourselves feeling resentful towards our partner. And I do have a video about this that I'll link in the description of this one. We want to be asking ourselves the question, what am I expecting of them? And have I made that expectation clear? If not, it might be time for a conversation where you go to your partner and you can even joke about it and go, hey, I've been waiting for you to read my mind about this thing. Or I have this expectation that you're going to do this. And I feel a little embarrassed or whatever it is to be bringing this up. But is that something you're comfortable with? Because I realized I never actually asked you. And this gives you the opportunity to start bringing in more of your wants and expectations and giving you the chance to get them met. Now, this might bring up a lot of other things like fear of rejection, if you are used to people disengaging from you when you bring in your own wants and needs. It might bring things up like shame and self-disgust that you even have things you want your partner to do for you or needs that you want fulfilled. But that's a great thing because working through those instances where we're encountering things like our own vulnerability or our own shame, those are the places where attachment healing starts actually happening, if we can find ways to work directly with what comes up for us in the process. So using partnerships, using intimate relationships as opportunities to encounter where you're blocked and start behaving in very different ways can potentially go a really long way towards both people's healing. But again, we have to get used to the process of making the unconscious conscious and then communicating it and seeing what happens. Third mistake I see so many anxious avoidant couples making, and I think that this one is even heavily reinforced where you go out looking for attachment-based relationship advice, is white-knuckling their way towards appeasing one another in relationship, instead of looking at why certain things feel so hard to do. So for example, the most classic one that you always see in this department is anxious parties are almost always told, just give your avoidant partner more space. And generally, because they want the relationship to work, the anxious party will go, okay, I'll do it. I'll just kind of get through the moments when I'm really distressed and my body feels like it's on fire, but they need space. I'll just kind of find a way to bear it. And then on the flip side of things, you might have the avoidant person feeling chronically pressured into commitment before they are ready. And so they'll kind of white knuckle their way through pretending that that's what they want with the relationship because maybe they feel like that is the good thing to do or the right thing to do. But the opportunity that's getting totally lost here is for both parties to look at why it feels so hard for them to do that thing. So for the anxious party, instead of just shaming yourself for not being good at self-regulation when your partner needs space from you, can you actually use this as an opportunity to be compassionate with yourself and curious about why that's so hard for you? Can you ask yourself the question, what skills would I have to learn in order to make this feel more comfortable for me? So the idea here is that anytime you feel like you're doing something simply because your relationship might fall apart if you don't, you can use that as an opportunity to ask yourself, how could I not just get through this, but actually relax into this experience? What would it take for me to get there? That might mean developing a lot of inner tools that both allow you to tolerate more space in a relationship, but potentially also connect you to partners who don't need as much if your preference is to genuinely just have more connected relationships. And on the flip side of things, if you are avoidant, instead of just assuming that you should be committing to every partnership you enter into, what if you really looked at what is it within that commitment that I'm afraid of? Sometimes the reason you're fearing commitment is because you have not learned to draw proper boundaries inside of your relationship and say no when you want to say no. Or maybe you haven't learned to see your relationship as a resource. So you feel like by committing to it, you're committing to a lifetime of a one-sided relationship where you're perpetually responsible for regulating both yourself and the other person. And the more you can start uncovering what it is inside of this commitment that is so draining or fear-inducing for you, the more you can start trying to design a relationship that feels a lot more comfortable and accessible. Like you can actually exhale inside of it and don't have to escape it in order to feel okay. Fourth mistake that I see anxious avoidant couples making that is such a big one that is so avoidable is neglecting the importance of raw emotional expression and trying to find the logical answer to everything. Now, to be securely attached means to be able to integrate the raw emotional data that your body is always providing you with the logical and cognitive reasoning of your brain. But in insecurely attached dynamics, what we tend to see is one person who tends to neglect more of the emotional and body-based signals that they're getting fed, which tends to be the avoidant-leaning person. And then someone who tends to neglect more of the cognitive aspects of relational planning, which tends to be the person who errs more anxious. Now, the problem with this is that it ends up creating a very specific dynamic that starts an immediate downward spiral, which is the avoidant party dismisses emotional information as real information. So the anxious party, who has real, raw emotional data that needs to be integrated in order for the relationship to work well, learns, I will only get my needs seen and attended to if I can convince my partner that there is a logic to them, regardless of whether or not I currently understand the logic behind them or think it's particularly relevant. And so when they're experiencing a raw emotion that feels really important for them to be seen in, the anxious party can sometimes latch onto whatever logical explanation or whatever story they can make up about their emotions that they think will get their partner to take it seriously. The problem is that if their partner does take it seriously, now they're not really working with the problem at the level it exists at, which is the level of emotion. So let's say, for example, you have a couple where one partner recently started working from home, and the other one starts getting angry when they see their partner home during the day. But maybe they're not really sure why that's happening. Why is it that when they walk into the living room and they see their partner sitting there, they get angry? If partner A feels like sharing their raw emotional data, which is anger, will not get the issue seen or taken seriously, what they'll do is try to find an explanation for it. So they'll go, okay, maybe I'm mad at them because I don't like their new job. And that might not feel 100% correct. But it might feel like a good enough explanation to take to their partner and go, hey, I'm angry because your new job doesn't make us enough money, and so I'm worried about our mortgage. And then a whole conversation starts happening on a level where it doesn't actually exist. Because maybe the actual problem, the actual reason for partner A's anger, is just that they suddenly don't have enough alone time, and their body is feeling kind of weird and frustrated as they're trying to adjust to a new routine. But if emotions cannot get expressed as raw data points and dealt with on that level, it's going to get really messy really quickly. And the way out of this is to start prioritizing raw emotional data as worthwhile in and of itself, on both parties' behalf. So, a lot of relationships start drastically increasing in health levels when they become safe places for one or both people to bring in whatever emotion they are feeling and say something to the effect of, I don't know where this is coming from, but I feel it, and I'm wondering if we can explore it together and figure out what it might be related to. This is how our relationships increase in accuracy. And when we have an increase in accuracy in relationships, it gets way easier to problem solve and way harder to get sucked into never-ending conflicts. But for that to happen, raw emotional data has to be valued by both people and not dismissed. Fifth thing that tends to hold back anxious avoidant couples is expecting their partner to behave perfectly securely when they know that they are with someone who is not securely attached. So once again, this is an ignoring of context. And when we're doing it, we are neglecting the role that we picked in choosing our partner in the first place. So a lot of the time, the very same traits that we find initially very attractive or enticing or convenient in our partners, they're so stoic and strong. They're so self-contained. Or they're so good at creating intimacy and seducing me. These things that we love from the get-go are very often inherent parts of our partner's attachment patterning. If we are constantly drawn to very stoic, self-contained partners, that very often comes with avoidant attachment or emotional unavailability. Or if we really like when our partners kind of set the tone and do the chasing and make sure that we are constantly feeling validated and wanted by them, that might very often be a product of anxious attachment. Because if we're not adapting to our partner's lives in equal measure to how much they're adapting to ours, we're unlikely to be attracting secure people. And we're more likely to be attracting people who are willing to kind of bend and contort a little bit to fit into our lives without us having to change too much. And so instead of looking at patterns of who am I attracting and why, we get attracted to who we get attracted to, and then we start judging them for not being secure. When in reality, their lack of secure attachment is likely a big reason why we got into the relationship with them unconsciously in the first place. And so the more we can own that, the more we can actually make room for the changes that we do want to see happening. Because we're aware, and we're going to get into this shortly, that the changes we are asking them to make, if we want them to become more emotionally available, or if we want them to become more independent, are in fact, in some cases, going to detract from those traits that first attracted us to them so much. And so what we want to get clear on here is, am I holding my partner to a standard that not only is unrealistic because they're not secure and they do have attachment wounding to work through, but also that subconsciously I might not find that attractive if they were to achieve it. And so the route out of this is to identify consciously what your ideal or fantasy version of your partner is, and then accept that your partner is a real person. And if they are insecurely attached, it is going to take a lot of time and effort for them to become more secure. And you have to be willing to make room for that and accommodations for that as you both work towards security. If you are chronically holding someone up to an ideal you have in your head where they are either always stoic and self-contained, but totally emotionally available when you want some co-regulation, you are looking at a fantasy. Because emotionally available people tend to be emotionally available in both directions. They're going to also come to you looking for co-regulation and expect the same type of co-regulation out of you that they are giving you. On the flip side, if you are looking for a partner who is independent only in the moments when you want them to be independent, and the rest of the time contorting to your needs, you are not thinking of things realistically. So stop saying you want your partner to be more secure if you are not ready for what that actually means. And it's okay to not be ready for what that actually means. This can be a process that can be super healthy and generative of the two of you sitting down together and mapping out the ways in which you want to grow with the awareness that there are things about each other's insecure attachment patterning that you actually like or benefit from as a couple. Which brings us very naturally to thing number 6 that anxious avoidant couples often get wrong, which is they do not make the space that is necessary inside of the relationship for each person to change, even in the ways that they explicitly decide as a couple they are going to change in. And the reason for this is because often, when we are wanting our partners to make a change, we are not ready for the side effects of that change. And so our systems might start panicking at the side effects and start unconsciously trying to shove the person back into the relational role that we are subconsciously more comfortable with them being in. So the kind of rule of thumb here is that if you want your anxious avoidant relationship to change in a significant way, you have to be ready for the power dynamic to change in a significant way. Because what secure relationships are is a fairly even power dynamic. So if you really struggle with things like making decisions and leading in the relationship, or if you really struggle with taking a back seat and letting your partner make important decisions, you're going to really struggle with your relationship becoming a more secure one. And so this absolutely can be worked with, but what we want to do is make it an exercise in becoming conscious about what it is that matters to us inside of relationships, as well as which skills we are going to need to develop to allow our partner the space they need to grow. So again, if you want your partner to be more independent, great. Are you willing to make the relationship a space where you take their lead more? Where you are more often the one reaching out to them and planning times to get together and fitting yourself into their social life? If you want your partner to be more emotional, great. Are you ready and able to hold the space that they're going to need when they come to you with their very raw, very dysregulated emotions, if they have spent a lifetime suppressing those things and don't really have a good idea of how to work with them yet? We have to look not just at what changes we want our partners to make, but what changes we are going to have to make, including the ones that might feel really unnatural for us, in order to support those changes. But again, the cool thing is that in this process, we start naturally evening out our own weak spots. And so both people can very authentically start working towards the direction of secure attachment by getting clear on what we need to do to support each other's change processes, and then learning the skills that we actually need to carry that out. 7th mistake that anxious avoidant couples tend to very often make is the conflicts they have get so big and take on such a life of their own that the baby ends up getting thrown out with the bathwater. So someone comes in with an issue, and the other person either gets really defensive or shuts down, or whatever it is. And then the whole issue for the next couple of days becomes trying to get the other person to stop shutting down, or to stop being defensive, or to deal with the insults that one partner doled out when they were feeling upset. And because we end up dealing with all of these defensive responses that come up during conflict, the actual issue itself can get totally lost in the process. And that does not mean that it's wrong to address unhealthy conflict behaviors. It's in fact very important to address those, but it's important to separate out what are we angry about, or what do we need to deal with on the level of how we handled the conflict, versus what was the core of the conflict and did we actually resolve it? And a lot of the time, the reason why recurring fights happen in anxious avoidant dynamics is because both people's inability to handle conflict well ends up creating so many secondary problems that the original one gets forgotten. And what happens when an issue gets forgotten? It comes up again and again and again. And so it can be a really useful practice for anxious avoidant couples to, at the end of a fight or at the end of a conflict, actually look back and go, wait a minute, what started this? And did we address that? Are we both satisfied with the solution that we found for that thing? If not, this fight is likely to just keep reoccurring. So if you find yourself in this pattern a lot, it can be really helpful just to hash out explicitly when you are debriefing how much of this argument or conflict was about the patterns that come up for us when in conflict, versus how much of it was focused on addressing the original problem. This is how you start resolving conflicts on multiple levels and actually lessen your chances of them reoccurring in the first place, as well as lessening your chances of moving through them poorly. 8th problem that is very common to anxious avoidant couples is that they are not projection literate. So, all attachment relationships are going to bring out our projections. So, ways in which we are looking at a human being who is standing in front of us in real time and seeing somebody else from our past. Or listening to stories in our head about how we think they should be different based on things that we have internalized about what it means to be a good or bad partner. And generally, what happens in insecurely attached dynamics is that if one person projects onto another person and says something like, well, you just always think this, the other person is very likely to get defensive and go, I do not always think this, therefore, I don't have to listen to anything you're saying. And both people can get so locked in this battle of one person trying to force a reality onto the other and the other one denying that reality that neither of them stop and look at what is actually happening here, which is a projection is online. And projections are often really powerful growth tools if we can learn to be conscious about them. What that means is that both people need to stop being so panicked about being misperceived, which absolutely is how it's natural to feel when someone is projecting something onto you, or when you are so sure that something is going on for another person, they just won't admit it, which is generally how it feels when we have a projection. Both parties need to be able to pause, be with the discomfort of the experience, and carve out a little bit more space for the other person's reality to be explored. That doesn't mean it needs to be accepted, just that we need some more room for exploration to happen. So that means actually entertaining for a moment. What if there is a signal inside of the muddle that is this projection? So these are words that a really good friend of mine always likes to use when referencing projections. The signal is the little piece of truth that exists inside of what is being said. And the muddle is all of the crap that's incorrect around it. So for example, if partner A is saying to partner B, you don't care about me, partner B might get really defensive about that because they know they do care about their partner, right? So they're reacting to the muddle, all of the untruths that are surrounding the potential kernel of truth. Whereas partner A is really focused on the kernel. And the kernel for them is that they don't feel cared about in some way that's significant to them. But they don't know how to communicate that precisely enough. So they're communicating it incorrectly. And a lot of the time when we're working with projections, things do not ever get resolved until both people are able to acknowledge both the signal and the muddle. There is something real and something important inside of the emotional experience of the projector, so the person who's doing the projecting. And there is also something very real and very much worth protecting inside of the defensiveness of the projectee, so the person who is having something projected onto them. And both of those things need to be explored. So when you are being projected upon, can you be with the experience of how uncomfortable it is and acknowledge that even though what this person is saying is not true, there's probably something that is true that they are experiencing and communicating incorrectly. So maybe you absolutely do care about them, but there are some ways in which you're a little bit dismissive or in which you're missing their experience. And maybe until that gets addressed and really pulled up explicitly and worked on, the projections are just going to keep coming. And on the other side, if you're the one doing the projecting, are you able to hold space for the fact that this other person is telling you their experience does not match what you are telling them their experience is? And is it possible that you are both right? That both there is a way in which you feel uncared for and a way in which they feel as though they care for you immensely? But that doesn't erase your experience. It just means you're not quite there yet. There's still a lot of muddle surrounding the signal. And you need to be able to work as a team to get to that kernel of truth by clearing away all the untruths, which you're only going to get to if both of you cooperate in the archaeology. So if both of you are willing to say, okay, I don't know why you feel so differently about this than I do, but let's try to figure out what might be going on that neither of us are fully conscious yet. And often that is where some of the most valuable learning experiences come from inside of our close relationships. When we become willing to go searching for the truth together, instead of assuming that one of us must have it and whoever makes their point the most emphatically is going to have their truth prevail. That might be how power dynamics work, but it is not how the truth works. So once again, this is about getting on the same team around a problem and deciding, instead of seeing this person as my enemy, we will see this problem, this conflict cycle that we're stuck in, as the problem. and we will work together to get to the bottom of it. Ninth mistake that anxious avoidant couples so frequently make is they do not foster relationship dynamics that are conducive to saying I'm sorry or doing repair work. Because both parties tend to feel so threatened by conflict that admitting that they have been wrong or that they are seeing things differently now feels like giving up their entire position. And so generally what needs to get worked on here is we have to really look at how we are responding to our partners coming to us in a state of humility. If they come up to us and they apologize for something they did, do we start scorekeeping and go, yes, you did that, and you did these 10 other things that you never took responsibility for, and kind of see their state of humility as an opportunity to hammer home more of our points? Because very often, that does not inspire them coming to us in the future in a humble state. It inspires future defensiveness. But it might feel really tempting to do that if we find that our partners are so rarely in a humble state. And so if we get them in this state where they are willing to admit they did something wrong, oh my God, we have to get in all the other things that they were wrong, and maybe they can take responsibility for those too, right? We might overseize the opportunity in a way that does not really inspire future instances of them coming to us with apologies. Or we might feel really morally outraged by what they did. So if they're coming to us and apologizing for it, we might immediately launch into a long rant about how everything they did was wrong and how we will not stand for it, instead of taking the bid for connection that is being extended to us and finding a way to express how we feel in a way that is not just pointing the finger at them and their bad behavior, but sharing with them the impact that their actions had on us. That's how we actually get in connection around repair work, right? Instead of seeing it as an opportunity to finally let our viewpoint triumph over the other person's, we want to look at, how do I receive their apology? Meet them in this state of humility, and also embody that humility and figure out as a couple where our wires are getting crossed here. If we are chronically stuck in scorekeeping, we make the relationship a hostile place for humility because humility gets punished. And that is the last thing we want to be doing if we want more collaboration. So what we want to do is just be really conscious about what is coming up for us in these instances. If our partner apologizes to us, and we really want to pummel them with 10 other things they did wrong that they're not taking responsibility for, can we hold that tension in our body? And can we report to them what that feels like? If we're not yet ready to meet that in that humble state of let's work together, can we tell them something like, hey, I really appreciate the apology, and there's all of this other stuff I'm still really upset about, and I don't know what to do about it because I don't feel like I can honestly reconcile with you until we also deal with this other stuff. Can we deal with that right now, or do you think we should save it for another time? This is the practice of holding our emotions in our body, observing them, and being skillful about how we communicate them. And on the flip side, if you come to your partner in a humble state with an apology, and you find that you are getting shamed or getting pummeled with other wrongs, can you, instead of shutting down or getting defensive, hold that energy in your body, be aware of it, and communicate it? I want to address this stuff, and I'm feeling really defensive or maybe really angry because I really wanted what I was saying in my original apology to be received by you and for us to work with that. Again, anytime we're changing a relational dynamic, it means we're going to be moving in new ways that might feel uncomfortable at first, but that ultimately get us a lot closer to that secure, healthy dynamic. And essentially, in layman's terms, this is just about making the relationship environment one where mistakes are not heavily punished, right? On even a wider scale, I feel like you see so many people on the internet complaining about everyone's lives being fake and complaining about everyone being narcissistic or whatever it is. But then look at what happens when people mess up or make a mistake. And we are so quick to just villainize and cancel people. Of course, that puts people on the defense and makes people really cautious about showing their true selves to the world. If we live in hostile environments that are not friendly to mistakes getting made and worked with, it is going to be a lot less likely for people to admit their shortcomings and ask for help. And we have to keep this in mind in our close relationships. If we want people to be more authentic with us, we have to make the relationship dynamic into a place where mistakes are welcomed in and worked with. And the 10th and final mistake that I see anxious avoidant couples making very frequently that could totally change their relationships with each other and themselves if they were to do this differently is they panic and double down on their original patterning when they are stressed or facing ambiguity. And this is so sad because when life presents us with ambiguous situations, when we feel threatened, either inside of our relationship or by our life conditions, the best thing we can possibly do is have another person we can turn to for co-regulation. But instead, very often what happens when either party is stressed is they double down on their most unhealthy attachment responses. So those who are more avoidant might try to control the situation or detach from the stressors, and those who are more anxious might become hyperfixated on things, and they might take those energies out on each other when what they could be doing is turning towards each other and going, hey, life is really overwhelming right now. The decisions we are up against as a couple are really overwhelming right now. What if we leaned on each other to get through them? What if we accepted that this situation we're in sucks? You having different needs than me sucks because we like each other and we want to be together. That might not be an option, but that doesn't mean we have to shame each other or hate each other for being different. We could just get on the same team and accept that life puts people in a lot of really uncertain and scary situations, and it helps to have someone to hold on to through that. And this is exactly what you see in secure dynamics. When things hit the fan in life, when needs start being in conflict, when people have different opinions on how to navigate through some new challenge that you're faced with as a couple, they look at all those challenges, they internalize them in their own ways, but they also lean on each other emotionally to get through them. And when you can start to do this as a couple, when you can start to see your problems as, again, not me against you, but me and you against the problem, even if the problem is our own relational patterning and our own attachment styles, not only is your bond with each other likely to deepen immensely, but having that space of safety and co-regulation is going to equip both of you to deal with the external challenges more effectively. So the saddest loop that anxious avoidant couples tend to get stuck in is when they are both stressed, they make each other the enemy and double their stress, instead of joining forces and cutting their stress in half. But this is, luckily, how you more naturally begin to frame problems and tackle them as you gain more secure attaching skills. All right, this list could be 10 times longer than this, but I am going to leave it at that for today. Feel free to add your own below. I love seeing you guys support each other in the comments. I truly think I have one of the most wholesome comment section on YouTube. There are so many pieces of good advice and encouragement that I see you guys giving in there. So please add your own things to this list and start talking to each other about strategies for working with those things, because we are all each other's best resource. All right, I will leave it at that, but as always, I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.